February 12th, 1993. Bootle, Merseyside, England. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon at the New Strand shopping centre. Fluorescent lights buzzing, crowds moving from store to store, the chatter of families and the sound of children's footsteps echoing across tiled floors. For James Bulger, it was a simple errand. She held the hand of her 2-year-old son, James, guiding him through the bustling centre. James was a typical toddler, curious, restless,
with wide eyes that darted toward every display of toys or sweets. At one point, as Denise stopped at a butcher's shop to pay for her groceries, James wriggled free from her grasp and toddled toward the doorway. It was a matter of seconds, the kind of moment every parent has experienced when a child slips just beyond reach. But this time, when Denise turned, James was gone. CCTV cameras captured what no one inside the centre noticed. 2 boys, later identified as Robert Thompson and Jon Venables, both just 10 years old, were loitering that day, wandering the mall without parents. The footage shows them approaching James near the entrance. One of them reaches down, takes the toddler's tiny hand, and together the 3 walk calmly out of the shopping centre. To passers-by, it looked like nothing more than an older brother leading his sibling home. No alarm was raised. What seemed so ordinary was, in fact, the beginning of an extraordinary horror. For the next few hours, James Bulger would be led on a journey across town, a walk that would end not in safety, but in violence and tragedy. The abduction of James Bulger was not the act of hardened criminals nor of shadowy men lurking in alleyways. It was carried out by 2 children, and that was what shook Britain to its core. This was not just another crime story. It was the shattering of an illusion that childhood itself was innocent and that evil had an age. The walk into the darkness. After snatching James from the safety of the shopping centre, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables led the toddler away without hesitation, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness of the streets. The CCTV footage captures a calm, chilling scene. 2 boys, one with short hair, the other with a mop of messy hair, walking side by side, their hands gripping the child's small fingers. James, barely able to keep up, clutched their hands, his little body waddling behind. The trio made their way through the crowded shopping centre, slipping unnoticed through the exits and into the public streets. The streets of Bootle, bustling with shoppers and commuters, became the stage for what was to come. James, in his innocent confusion, did not resist. He did not scream for his mother. He simply followed, unaware that he was being led to unimaginable horror. The 2 boys, however, had already set their course. They knew exactly where they were going. As they walked, the boys exchanged words between themselves, their tone eerily casual, as if they were discussing something as mundane as a walk to the park. To the people around them, the scene seemed unremarkable. They passed by storefronts, people walking by with shopping bags, families heading home. No one questioned the 2 boys, who looked almost natural with their victim in tow. James's path, however, was not one that led to the safety of home or an innocent destination. The boys guided him deeper into the maze of suburban streets, away from the bright, busy areas of the shopping centre, and into the quieter, desolate corners of the town. The further they walked, the more isolated the streets became. In some areas there was no one else around. The houses stood like silent witnesses to the growing terror. The boys showed no urgency in their steps. They were not in a rush.
They were walking deliberately, each step taking them further into darkness. At one point they stopped. They took turns hitting James, punching him in the stomach and kicking him in the legs. At this stage, James must have been confused and terrified, but his cries went unnoticed. A man walking his dog glanced over but did not stop. No one intervened. By the time they reached the secluded railway tracks near Walton Lane, The abuse had escalated. The area was isolated.
Far from the prying eyes of passers-by. The boys dragged James to the tracks, and in the few moments that followed, their cruelty intensified. They kicked him, hurled bricks at his body, and beat him with iron bars. Every strike seemed calculated, an effort to break James not just physically but mentally. James's small body was no match for their violence, but worse was yet to come. With the train tracks as the backdrop, they continued their brutal assault, pushing James further into the realms of pain, confusion, and terror. The brutal killing. By the time they reached the railway line, James had already been broken in body and spirit. What began as a seemingly innocent walk to nowhere had turned into an unimaginable nightmare. Robert Thompson and Jon Venables, though both children, had already begun to exhibit a disturbing calmness. The coldness in their eyes was chilling, and in those moments, they were no longer just boys. They were monsters disguised in the skin of children. James, his small body battered and bruised, was no longer struggling to keep up. He had been pushed beyond his limits. His hands, once eager to hold on to his captors, now hung limp by his sides. The pain, the confusion, the terror. It was too much for him to comprehend. His cries were weak, but they were there, echoes of a child trying to make sense of the horror unfolding around him. Yet there was no mercy. The boys did not rush. They were deliberate in their cruelty. They stripped James of his clothes, leaving him naked in the cold, vulnerable. They laughed between themselves as they began to torment him further, kicking him, hitting him with bricks and stones, each blow more forceful than the last. They were like predators playing with their prey, taking turns as they inflicted unimaginable pain on the child. The violence, though sickening, felt like a twisted ritual to them. One of the boys, some say it was Robert, took a brick and smashed it into James's face. The sound was sickening. The force of the blow caused James's body to crumple. But he didn't die. Not yet. The boys didn't want him to die too quickly. They wanted to draw it out, to savor the suffering, as if the pain of their victim was somehow giving them power. As the beating continued, Thompson and Venables seemed to grow more excited, and the casual way they continued their attack, as if they were playing a game, showed a level of detachment that could only come from pure sadism. It wasn't enough to simply hurt James. No, they had to destroy him physically and mentally. And when they had done enough, they decided to kill him, but in the most heartless way imaginable. James's hands were still tied behind his back. They strangled him with his own shoelaces, an act that was both practical and brutally symbolic. It was the final act of dehumanization. They did not feel remorse. They did not feel fear. They simply ended his life coldly and without hesitation. At 3:30 p.m., a train passed through the area. The collision with James's body was violent, gruesome, and final. The impact was enough to destroy what little remained of the child. The train crushed him, a final act that only added to the depravity of their crime. Yet even after James was dead, his killers didn't feel the weight of what they had done. They simply left him there, abandoned like an old broken toy, as though he had never been a living, breathing child. Witnesses who had passed by during the attack would later admit they had seen the two boys walking with James. They had watched them head in the direction of the railway, but none had thought to intervene. Some even said they had noticed the strange, distant look in the boys' eyes, but they assumed it was just childish behavior. The reality was far darker than any of them could have imagined. The discovery and the aftermath. The discovery of James Bulger's body wasn't just a shock to his family. It was a punch to the gut of a nation. The day after his abduction, James's mother, Denise Bulger, spent hours walking through the streets of Bootle, calling out for her son, asking anyone who would listen if they had seen him. Neighbors and strangers alike joined the search, but the panic that settled in her chest was unbearable. Each moment without news felt like a lifetime. Denise's search turned to despair when the police confirmed that a child's body had been found. That morning, the cold, unthinkable truth was revealed to her. Her precious son had been murdered. For Denise, this was the end of any hope she had left. In an instant, her life was shattered, and the memories of a happy, playful child were ripped away. She would never see her son smile again. The police immediately launched an investigation, and the news spread like wildfire across the country. But it was the horrific discovery at the railway tracks that turned the story from one of shock to one of horror. James's body was found disfigured, his limbs contorted in unnatural positions, his face bruised and battered. His small, innocent body had been used as a vessel for the most heinous acts imaginable. And the details of the crime began to surface slowly. The first signs that something was deeply wrong came when the police learned the child's body had been left on the tracks. A gruesome final touch to the violence. But the true horror lay in the investigation that followed. As detectives reviewed footage from the new Strand shopping centre, they noticed two boys who were seen walking away from the scene, hand in hand with James. The faces of the killers were clear in the CCTV footage. The community, already devastated by the disappearance of an innocent child, was now gripped by the realization that James's murder had been committed by two children, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables. Two boys, no older than the victim himself, had planned and carried out the most brutal crime. This revelation rocked the nation. People struggled to comprehend how two children could commit such a heinous act. The innocence of youth was shattered, leaving behind a chilling question. How could this happen? The police, already reeling from the shock, worked quickly. The boys were apprehended within days. Interviews with them revealed a chilling level of detachment and coldness, with no remorse shown for their actions. Thompson and Venables recounted their brutal attack on James with startling calmness, revealing the extent of their cruelty. The case left the nation grappling with difficult questions. How could two children commit such a crime? What does this say about society, about the failure of family, or even the mental health of young children? The media were quick to sensationalize the story, depicting the boys as monsters, but the truth was far more complicated. James's death was not just the murder of a child, it was the collapse of the idea that innocence could ever truly be protected. The children were immune to the darkness of the world. His murder shattered the illusion that youth is free from the horrors of violence, and it changed the way people viewed crime, justice, and the lives of young offenders. The trial and sentencing. The trial of Robert Thompson and Jon Venables was a spectacle that captivated the nation, but it also stirred up intense debate. How could two 10-year-olds be capable of such a heinous crime? Could they fully understand the consequences of their actions? These questions dominated the courtroom and the media, making the case one of the most controversial in British legal history. The trial began in November 1993, and it was unlike any the country had seen before. The two boys, barely old enough to be considered adults in the eyes of the law, stood before the judge, their faces expressionless. There was no fear in their eyes, no remorse. They seemed strangely detached from the gravity of the situation, which only deepened the public's sense of unease. During the proceedings, the prosecution painted a chilling picture of the boys' actions. They detailed how Thompson and Venables had lured James away from the shopping centre with chilling ease, how they had tortured and abused him for hours, and how they had ultimately murdered him with cold deliberation. The autopsy revealed the full extent of James's suffering: blunt force trauma to the head, multiple injuries, and evidence of sexual assault. The defense, however, argued that the boys were too young to fully understand the consequences of their actions. They were still children, they claimed, and they did not deserve the same punishment as an adult. It was revealed that both boys had come from troubled backgrounds with histories of abuse and neglect, but despite these factors, the court ultimately found them guilty. On November 24, 1993, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables were convicted of the murder of James Bulger. They were sentenced to indefinite detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, a form of imprisonment used for young offenders. The judge, in his ruling, emphasized the extreme nature of the crime, but also acknowledged the boys' youth and the need for rehabilitation. The public reaction was swift and intense. Many felt that the boys were too young to be held fully accountable for their actions, while others believed that they should be treated as adults due to the severity of the crime. Some even called for the death penalty, but the law at the time did not permit such a punishment for those under 18. Both Thompson and Venables were sent to separate detention centers, where they would remain until their sentences were reviewed. Over the years, there was growing public interest in their rehabilitation and eventual release. In 2001, both boys were granted parole under new identities, but the release only fueled further public outrage, as many believed they had not served enough time for their horrific crime. The legacy and controversy James Bulger's murder left an indelible mark on the British public, forcing society to grapple with uncomfortable truths. Two 10-year-olds had committed a crime so horrific it shook the very foundation of what it meant to be a child. Could a child be capable of such evil? This question haunted the nation. The trial of Robert Thompson and Jon Venables was a media frenzy. Public opinion was divided. Many believed the boys were too young to fully comprehend their actions, while others felt the crime was so severe that age shouldn't matter. The legal system grappled with how to handle such extreme juvenile violence. When the boys were sentenced to indefinite detention, many saw it as a fair punishment, but others felt they should have been treated like adults. In 2001, when they were released under new identities, public outrage flared again. Was the punishment enough? Had they really paid for their crime? The case sparked debates about the justice system's treatment of young offenders and the lasting scars left on the victims' families. James Bulger's legacy is a reminder that evil can appear in unexpected forms, and that even the youngest among us can be capable of unspeakable horrors. The case forever altered how we think about justice, childhood, and the consequences of crime. I am truly shocked by the James Bulger case. As I read about what happened, I felt a deep sadness in my heart, imagining the unimaginable horrors that little James had to endure. The fact that such cruelty came from two children, barely older than James himself, is something I still can't fully comprehend. As a parent, this case terrifies me. The thought of my own child going through such pain is beyond anything I could bear. The loss of innocence, the brutal violence, and the fact that no one intervened, it leaves me feeling deeply unsettled. It's a haunting reminder that evil can come from the most unexpected places, and it makes me question how we, as a society, can protect the most vulnerable among us.
See you next time.